name is Ms. Wei. I've had domestic worker for last 11 years.
My name is Ju Him, and I've employed a foreign domestic worker for over 17 years.
My name is Ivan Ng, and I have been an employer of domestic workers for more than 20 years.
For human beings, we all need rest. I think it's a basic need. For me, if I go too long without a break, I feel myself starting to burn out, and I'm not as effective in my work. So my work also suffers. My health suffers, my mental health suffers, and I think my work suffers as well. For most of us, I think a week is a reasonable length of time that we do require a break to be sustainable. It just makes sense. Like for a lot of us, we do have at least one day off a week, if not two. So I think it's really important for domestic workers as well.
First of all, it's a common sense. When I used to work for a company, and then I had Sunday off or Saturday off from work, I would expect that I would not be expected to work for my employer at least for 24 hours. And I think it's for anybody who are in employment, it's just a right that is granted to everyone, that rest day means one entire day. And if you're asked to perform any work during that time, I would expect compensation for it.
Domestic work is something like you don't have a very defined scope. Sometimes you can take care of the elderly in the middle of the night, or baby, when they cry. So if you are not, you're talking about just one day, right? But then the definition of the one day can be very blurred. Then the domestic worker can be, wake up in the very early morning, right? And then they start work, and then like for example Sunday, then they can only leave the house by 10 o'clock. And after that, then the employer may ask them, I may have a dinner, get together, you come back to cook for us. Then the worker came back on 6 o'clock in the evening. So that is not, one day, right? It is really not enough rest for such. And I also look at myself. I am an employee, I am a staff, and of course I expect one day is really, I don't need to worry anything about my work for that whole day, and I can spend time with my friends, all these things, do whatever I want without having, this hours thing is still in my mind.
Domestic workers, work with fire, they cook, they work with, raw foods. A lot of times they look after young children or the elderly, or sometimes even to do with like cleaning windows or fans at the height. So when your brain is in a fog, it's very hard to do all these things in a safe manner and in a manner that's required, right? Like you may accidentally put the raw food together with fruits or something because your brain is just not fully functioning. So I think it's important to recognize that as human beings, we have certain physiological needs that cannot be negotiated beyond a certain extent without really serious repercussions.
I think rest is so important, and I experience, of course, for my own, right? If you do work non-stop for a certain period without rest, first, I think physically you get very tired. And then mentally, now we have more people talking about mental health, right? And mentally, you can't have a space, say, I can leave my work, right? And then you still have to be so active in what I should do next, right? Sometimes I know that the employer may give the list, right, to the worker, one after the other, from the morning till night. So these are all become a burden. It may not have a very adverse impact 1-2 days, I feel, but over time, day in, day out, right, and without even a proper rest on Sunday, it will create that kind of stress, right, that may overwhelm, the worker. And when you are overwhelmed, anything can happen. I would say, even when we read the news, right, we may see, the workers can do some things that harm herself or harm her employer. So these are all the things that we don't want to see, right? But if we know there is a risk then it's better to avoid it, right? Find ways to prevent it rather than when it happens, then we find a remedy. So this is not the way that I would say it.
Privacy is a basic human need. At times when I was living with a roommate, when we went overseas for studies, whatever, there's too little privacy over a period of time, I get very cranky and I kind of feel like something's not right, and I think that's why there's some documentation of children who live in institutional situations where they may be other issues from utter lack of privacy. Majority of people that I know cannot imagine having no privacy whatsoever. So it's the same. I understand that sometimes the availability of privacy is also limited for some people and some families. But maybe just at least a cabinet or a curtain they can draw some of the time. For most of us at work, right, we escape to the toilet when we need a break, especially if we need to cry, we don't want to cry in front of people. You cannot deprive them for too long or too much before there's serious issues arising.
From my experience, right, because when we employ our first employer, our first domestic helper, she's the one who took care of our firstborn child after just a few months. So we, in a way, we couldn't say let her to stay in a very small room, by herself, and then she need to also take care of the baby, but it is not the ideal. We all understand it's not the ideal. We try to discuss with her, is it okay, right? Because we know that at night sometimes you need to feed the babies, the rest is very intermittent, right? And then at the day you still need to do the housework. But at least we try to let her stay with the baby for the room and without any monitoring, right? Because now very common to have a CCTV everywhere, right? That is something that we would not do, in order for our helper to feel more comfortable in her own private space. And of course, at the same time, like you said, we also need our privacy, right? So she is no doubt a helper, but again, we can't cross the line too much, right? And then they're interfering, the privacy of each other. So actually after our children grows up a bit, they don't need the night care or the night feeding. We let the helper to stay in her own room, all by herself. So that is what we tried to do.
I think the privacy issue for domestic worker could be very sensitive and important because we are in a very unusual situation where employer and domestic worker live together under one roof, and also the children to a small age are running around the house, right? So in my case, my domestic worker has her own room, and she can lock the door of her room whenever she wants, and whenever we want to talk to her while she is in her room, we make sure we lock the door and to try not to disturb her, for example during her day off or after her work hour. And I even try to communicate her through WhatsApp after work hour, even though I know she's in her room. And also I tell my children who are my kids are aged 9, 12 and 15. I tell them often not to disturb her when she's in her room and respect her privacy all the time. I think it's very difficult, but it has to be determined through negotiations and trust that have to be built between the employer and employee. And for the employer side, I think we have to do whatever possible to give her private space by either providing curtain division or something that will obstruct the view, so that when she talks to her family, or she changes her clothes, or simply when she wants to be herself, be on her own, she will have that space no matter how small. I think the phones are probably more important to domestic workers to anybody else like ourselves, because they do live far away from their family, so the phone is the only way to keep in touch with the family, and more so with the children. And since they are grown up, responsible adults, I do respect my domestic workers to hold on to her phone 24/7, and then I trust her to use it when she needs to use it, even during the work hour. It's very important to talk to your domestic worker when you hire her initially, to set some sort of rules of when she can use her phone and when she shouldn't be using her phone. I don't have small children right now, but I can imagine if your domestic worker is taking care of a small baby, I think it's reasonable to ask her not to use her phone. But like my household, where the children are all grown up and all my domestic worker does is clean the house and cook, she always has her phone next to herself, just in case her family calls her for emergency, her son needs her for some emotional support, and it's been working quite well that way.
Phones is a way of communication. Sometimes when I work with young people during the last 2 years of COVID and all that, and I ask them, is there one item that they think really helped them through all the lockdown and all the craziness of home-based learning and things like that? So many young people, students, teenagers have shown me their phones, because they say it's a means of communicating with their friends when they can't see them face to face. And home-based learning was at most, I think, 1 or 2 months, and then lockdown was at most like 2 months. So even 2 months, so many of us Singaporean young kids, teenagers, adults, they feel that the loss of connection with their friends and loved ones. So what more for domestic workers who are away from home at least for 1 year, sometimes 2 years. So their phone is just a way for them to communicate with their loved ones back home. And I believe that if they know that their loved ones are safe and well, that they're able to do a better job for me as well, do a better job here. So yeah, I have no issues with them using their phones, especially in the evenings after they finish their work, and they want to call home and talk with them. And I give my helper our Wi-Fi password to say, please go ahead, and use it.
I think the golden rule, we all know, applies. What I want it to be done for myself, it should apply for the others, right? So when I having my mobile phone, right? Yeah, like 20 years back, it's very expensive to own a mobile phone. So the helper don't have a mobile phone, but she always has access to our house phone. That means if someone call her from Philippines, long distance, a family member, no time limit or no certain period of time she has to fix on talking to the family, right? And then once she has a mobile phone, like every one of us, this is your private property, right? This is your own phone, and so you do it. I think it's in a very reasonable way. For example, I don't expect my helper talking on the phone while feeding the baby or washing the dishes or cooking, right? During the daytime, we don't explicitly, I would say, to tell her don't use phone. But I will always tell her that, okay, after the dinner, washing the dishes, you do whatever you want. I think maybe good that you can use your phone to call your family, you call your friends. Yeah, it is not a problem for us. So that is how we talk to her. It's not in a fixed and fast rule, but with a common understanding that what is the reasonable use of private phones. Yeah.
I think the employment documents or any documents that belongs to the person stay with that person. And frankly speaking, if my employment documents, including passport or work permit, was taken away by my employer, I would be devastated. And then more importantly, I would question the trust that is only to myself and the employer, and I would feel that I'm not trusted enough to work for them. I think it's important that we trust our domestic workers, that she is a grown-up person who lives far away from their family and who is strong enough, brave enough, and responsible enough to come to Singapore to work, and they are capable of taking care of their own personal documents.
I would only keep the document of a child, for instance. I would never think of keeping such documents for an adult. And it feels like we're either infantilizing them, saying they're incapable, or we're trying to, I don't know, exert control over them, I guess. And that's one thing that I've never understood. If I'm trusting this person to look after my nearest and my dearest, why would I treat them badly?
Never experienced that, but if it really happened to me, I feel intimidated, right? Because it is something that is like my identity, right? That shows my identity, and something that gives me a sense of freedom also. Because if I want to go out, I want to travel, that is something that I need, right? But then, how come I was being, stopped from having it or from using it? For example, I already employ a domestic worker in my house, and it is based on trust. If you say I keep all these things, that means what is the trust? Yeah, I don't feel there is a trust. And then if someone I don't feel the trust from someone, it's very hard, to work properly or work in harmony, right, together, even under one roof, Yeah, and it is a kind of human dignity, right? I would put it in a more higher level already, because everyone is a person on its own, right? And then they have all the rights of being a human being. And then you say, oh, I have to keep this in order to restrict your freedom. Then I don't see this person as a human person anymore.
I think live-out options is going to be very beneficial for people, especially who has smaller households, who cannot provide adequate space, living private space for their domestic workers. The arrangement will be also beneficial for the mental well-being of the domestic workers, since at the end of the day, they can distance themselves from their employer and have their own private life, go out, enjoy their time with their friends, and do whatever they need to do, and then come back to the workplace refreshed the next day. I think having a live-out option could be very important. At the same time, keeping the living option available for those who need it. For example, families who have elders, small children, who can benefit from domestic workers staying with them all the time, so that in case of emergency or in case of cares during the nighttime, domestic workers will be available to help out. In that case, I think it's very important that this is an option, and domestic worker is made understood what are the conditions, and then should be also compensated accordingly.
I think in a household where there are no young children and elderly, I think live-out option is really helpful, because then the whole employer family, we can also have our own privacy without another person in the house, and the domestic worker gets their own time and privacy when they leave work, right? So there's a clear demarcation when they can go and have their rest.
It's very understandable, right? Depend on the nature of work of the domestic helper in the household, right? I can understand, if you are taking care of very young children or the elderly, yeah, they may need the helper really at night, right? So sometimes in this situation, the live-out option may not be so applicable, right? But on the other hand, yeah, like our case, after some time when the children grow up, they have their own lives, and actually, I would say it is not necessary for the helper to stay with us. But of course, one concern is also up to the helper, right? Because if I say that I let you stay out, she may need to take care of her rent, right? So we need to pay for her rental, a part of the transport, right? Also maybe the food. But I think this decision is not mine to make. Yeah, I have to let the helper to decide, right? Because the job nature is really not about children and the elderly. And then, yeah, give her, like you said, give her an option to consider. Overall, I must say an option should be granted depend on the nature of work. And the worker herself has a say, in this process. Yeah, it's not just one side kind of forceful kind of decision by the employer.
Again, as human beings, we miss home. And actually been listening to podcasts where this whole thing about nostalgia and homesickness was really documented, even in the way back. I think the example they gave was the Crimean War, where the soldiers and they were diagnosed with melancholia or something, which is basically homesickness. So I think everybody gets homesick. The poets are old, and also all through history, and a lot of documentation, a lot of artistic work created because of homesickness. So if you deprive someone of the opportunity to go home, I think we're taking away something very human about them. And especially when it's not like an absolute die necessity, it can be negotiated, it can be arranged. So why not? I mean, we have people that we miss and we try to visit them as often as we can. So I think it's important to accord domestic workers that opportunity as well. I think it's important because they know what they're getting themselves into. You want a worker who's reliable, who you can trust, and who's capable of doing the job. I mean, when we interview for work ourselves, we want to know our job scope, what's the job description, to know that we are capable of doing the job, be compensated fairly, and see that we're not expected to do something so far out that's not within our job scope, that we either don't have expertise or it could be dangerous for us to do and things like that. So it's the same for them, that they know what they're getting themselves into, so they're fully prepared and committed to do the work. And I think it's also important to acknowledge the individual's preferences and also expertise. Some workers like to look after children and some don't. Some are good with elderly and some are not. Some like to cook and clean, whereas some prefer caregiving, or the different permutations. And when we look for a job, we want there to be some kind of, at least a bit of a match between our likes, our capabilities, and what the job demands us to do. I don't think there can be one size fit all for any situation, and definitely for a domestic worker situation. So it's really important for them to know what they're expected to do, and also for them to know that whether their day off and the days off are written into the contract, and they can have a day off. They're entitled to use their phones, and also for their home leave. I think with this clarity, then both sides are clear where they stand, and there's no misunderstanding on unhappiness.
Yeah, of course, when I sign my employment contract, I need to go through it very in detail, right? Because it is my rights and also my liabilities, right? In case anything goes wrong. So likewise, the domestic worker must understand, the meaning, inside the small letters, especially, right? Inside the contract. So, if you ask me, after signing the contract, of course, we ask the agent, right? I have a copy, and the one copy is with the worker, with the domestic helper. Yeah, I never will touch that. And also, the agent is we are together, right? Trying to going through every clause of the contract, and then to ask the worker, do you understand, right? Yeah, and then we sign without any cohesion, anything that you are feeling that you are forced to sign it. So I think it's important, also in case of disputes, we have something to lean on, black and white, right, which is also legal document, rather than just verbals. I say this, you say this, right? So I think it's a contract is really fair to both parties, rather than only one.
Ultimately, for me, I always think that, hey, I'm trusting my little bundle, most precious bundle to them. Why would I want to treat anybody that looks after my most precious bundle? Why would I want to treat them badly? I'll be so grateful for them for caring for my child and making sure they eat and they're healthy. That I would want to repay them, by at least giving them just a basic, minimum standard of living.
In Singapore, there are still many to do, to improve for the domestic workers, for their rights, for their living condition, for their pay, everything, for the treatment. So, if Singapore government always pride in herself, I'm a Singaporean also, right? Of course, but prided herself as some of the most advanced cities, country. We are aiming for a gracious society. How about this part of the population, right? Now, domestic worker, do we live it up to our name that we are advanced, or we are still fall short, or in many areas? I think this is a very important thing for everyone. I'm not saying only the government, for employer, for agency, to think about it, and see, if we have done well, some part of it, keep it. But if those things that we really can improve, right? We have room to do better for these healthy people who are so important actually in our family, right? You imagine without this domestic worker being in Singapore, how many families, right? A Singaporean family can really suffer, right? In many ways, right? But we become too comfortable, too easy to have a helper, and then we take it for granted, right? Yeah, we really take it for granted. Yeah, just like anything can do that, why? Then I think it's very dangerous. And then we have to ask ourselves the question, right? Are we treating them as a human person, or as the same as us, right? Even our economic levels can be different, our backgrounds are different. But when we are together in the same household, and I do better for them. That's how I feel.